Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Tonight, I've got over an hour of real-life Reddit stories to keep you company. It's a good mix of drama, revenge, and interesting situations people go through. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some hardcore gameplay I got today where I spend most of the time shaping the interior for my base. Also, I try to post these videos daily, so whenever you need something to relax or fall asleep to, feel free to drop a sub and check out the channel. But anyways, let's get started with the video. This first story is about a hotel worker who dealt with a mysterious guest whose spending gave them a front row seat to how the ultra wealthy live. Back when I used to work at a high-end resort on a private island, I thought I had already seen everything until this one booking came along that completely redefined what rich meant to me. To give you an idea, our resort was pure luxury from top to bottom. Around 95% of our inventory was made up of overwater bungalows, and the remaining 5% were our exclusive on-land villas. Those villas were something else. Sprawling spaces with private pools, direct beach access, personal butlers, and price tags starting at around $15,000 a night. The most extravagant one, called the Royal Villa, was reserved for the ultra-rich, celebrities, royals, or billionaires who didn't even blink at those prices. Now typically, our front desk didn't interact much with villa guests. They had their own dedicated butler team who handled everything, from pre-arrival coordination to in-stay requests. Still, I worked closely enough with the butlers that I knew when someone special was checking in. One day, I saw a new booking come through that immediately caught my attention. The reservation was under a name that didn't ring any bells, just some generic-sounding alias. When I tried searching it online, nothing came up. But then I looked closer at the booking details, and that's when my jaw dropped. This mystery guest had reserved multiple overwater bungalows and the Royal Villa, altogether totaling around $50,000 per night, and they were staying for 6 nights. That's $300,000, just like that. The day of arrival came, and we were all prepped for this VIP guest, except there was no arrival time listed. That was unusual. Normally, high-paying guests had their butlers coordinate down to the minute. I checked with the butler team, and they said they had been in contact but didn't have a confirmed arrival time either. The guests might come that day, or they might not. Apparently, it was no rush. So we waited, and waited. They didn't show. No calls, no updates, nothing. The next morning, I followed up again, and the butlers finally had news. The guest had decided they'd be arriving the next day instead. Just like that. No apology, no explanation. They prepaid everything, so they didn't seem to care about the 2 nights they were skipping. That meant they had booked the stay 2 days earlier than they actually intended to arrive, just in case they decided to come early. I remember just sitting there thinking, who does that? On the 3rd day, we finally got a confirmed arrival. But it wasn't the guest. It was their staff, a small group of nannies and assistants. They showed up, checked in on behalf of the guest, and gave us a credit card for incidentals. Everything about them was calm, polite, and professional, but it was clear they were part of a very wealthy household. Then one of the staff's security members asked me a question I'll never forget. He leaned over and said, "Can the tender from the yacht pull up directly onto the private beach of the Royal Villa?" That's when I realized what kind of guest we were dealing with. Apparently, the actual guest wasn't even on the island yet. They were staying on their Mega-Yacht, one that was over 130 meters long, and were using our resort villa like an extension of their yacht. We'd never had anyone ask to dock a tender right on the villa's beach before, but of course we said yes. When you're dealing with that level of money, you don't really say no. Over the next few days, the butler team handled most of the coordination, but I still got bits and pieces of updates. Turns out, the guest and their entourage used the Royal Villa more like a day retreat than an actual place to stay. Out of the 4 nights they had left, they only spent 2 sleeping there. The other nights, they returned to their yacht. They come ashore during the day to swim in the infinity pool, have lunch or dinner prepared by our chefs, and then head back to the yacht at night. The villa itself sat mostly empty. Lights off, air conditioning running, everything perfectly maintained for the chance they might drop by. It was surreal. By the end of their stay, their total bill had climbed past $325,000, and they didn't even blink. To this day, it's still the most jaw-dropping display of wealth I've ever seen in person. I've served plenty of rich guests before, but this was different. This wasn't someone treating themselves to a once-in-a-lifetime vacation. This was someone casually spending a small fortune for convenience, just because they could. I never actually saw the guest in person, not once. Only their staff, their security, and the occasional glimpse of their sleek yacht out on the water. But that booking still sticks in my mind. It was the kind of story that makes you realize how differently some people live, like we're on completely separate planets. That's where the story ends. It's wild to think some people can casually drop that kind of money like it's nothing. The idea of booking extra days just in case feels almost unreal. But I guess when you're at that level, convenience is worth more than cost. It's kind of fascinating and a little mind-bending to see how far apart everyday life and extreme wealth can really be. This next story is about someone who helped old friends build a business from the ground up, only to be betrayed by them and get payback in the most unexpected, hilarious way. A couple of years ago, one of my friends, let's call him Jared, came to me with an idea. He wanted to open a bar and music venue. At the time, I'd been bartending for about 7 years and had helped open a few successful spots, so I knew my way around the industry pretty well. Jared, on the other hand, had zero experience, but he was excited, motivated, and looking for someone who knew what they were doing to help get things started. He told me he was buying a local venue and wanted to completely rebrand it, make it into something bigger, trendier, a place people would want to go every weekend. I liked the idea, and because we were friends, I wanted to help, so I jumped in. Once things started moving, I handled everything behind the scenes. I set up the entire point of sale system, the thing the staff uses to take orders and process payments. I hired all the bartenders, trained them, handled inventory ordering, managed suppliers, and basically ran every single operational piece that made the place work. Meanwhile, the owners, including Jared, had no idea what they were doing. They had never worked a shift in their lives behind a bar. They didn't know the first thing about stock rotation, customer service, or how to handle busy nights. But they acted like they were experts anyway. At first, I brushed it off. I figured they were just learning and that eventually things would balance out. But that never happened. They started treating me terribly. Payments were always late. Promises about my pay, my bonuses, my share in the business, all conveniently forgotten when it came time to deliver. They started taking credit for my work too, telling people they built the bar from scratch when, in reality, I had done every single thing that made it function. Then came the final blow. They started spreading lies about me, personal stuff, ugly things that weren't true at all, things that could have hurt my reputation in the industry. After everything I had done for them, they decided to throw me under the bus just to make themselves look better. At that point, I walked away. I didn't want to deal with them anymore. I left the business, cut contact, and moved on. But even after all that, they still owed me money. A lot of money. Fast forward to recently. I was going through my phone one night when I noticed something, an app I hadn't opened in ages. It was an old app I'd used when I was helping set up the bar's lighting and sound system. Back then, I had configured everything myself, from the lighting scenes to the automated color changes for different nights. And suddenly, it hit me. They never removed my access. Curious, I opened the app. Sure enough, I could still see everything. The lighting zones, the control boards, the timers. Everything was still connected, live, and ready to use. At first I just laughed, but then I decided to test it, just to see if it still worked. I waited until a night when I knew the bar would be open, not one of their busiest nights, just a regular evening. I opened the app, picked one of the lighting zones, and turned it off. Instantly, the app showed a message. Successful. I sat there for a second, grinning. Then I turned the lights back on. And it worked. I could only imagine the confusion inside that bar as the lights flickered off and on out of nowhere. People probably thought the power was going out or that there was some glitch in the system. So I did it again and again. I didn't overdo it, just enough to make them scratch their heads. I'd wait a few minutes, then switch things off, then back on. After a little while, I noticed all the devices go offline in the app. That meant they had turned off the power to the building. They were probably running around flipping breakers, trying to figure out what was going on. Once I saw that the systems were back online, I kept it going for a while longer, maybe 20 or 30 minutes in total. I didn't want to push it too far, so I stopped after that. But I was already laughing to myself, imagining their faces. Then I decided to take it a step further. The lighting system has automatic timers, settings that can control when lights turn on or off without anyone touching them. So I went in and programmed a little surprise. Every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, their biggest nights, the main bar area lights will now automatically turn off at midnight. Just the bar lights, though. I left the dance room upstairs alone, so it'll stay lit. That way it won't seem like a full power outage. Just an annoying, confusing problem that they can't figure out. And because none of them have any idea how to use that system, I know it's going to take them ages to fix it. They'd have to reset and rebuild everything from scratch. And honestly, I doubt they even know where to start. It's not huge or destructive revenge. I didn't ruin their business or mess with anything dangerous. I just gave them a little taste of the frustration they caused me. A few nights of confusion and panic, that's all. The best part? Every time the lights flicker off, I'll know. I'll see it right on my app, watching from wherever I am, knowing they're scrambling to figure out what's wrong. After everything they did, it's the perfect kind of quiet payback. That's where this story ends. That kind of revenge hits in the perfect spot between clever and harmless. It's just enough to make them lose their minds without crossing the line. What's wild is how they never thought to remove his access after all that. It's one of those moments where karma just sorts itself out with a little help from technology. This next story is about a guy who spent nearly his whole life thinking he just couldn't handle spicy food, until his family realized the shocking truth. I grew up in a Mexican family where food isn't considered real food unless it makes you sweat. Every meal in our house came with some kind of heat, whether it was red salsa, green salsa, or a plate so loaded with chilies it felt like a dare. I was the odd one out. My tolerance for spice was basically non-existent, and over the years, I just accepted that I was the family lightweight. Everyone in my family could throw down a taco drenched in salsa verde without even blinking, while I was sitting there fanning my mouth after one bite. It became a running joke. Every family gathering, someone would tease me about being the one who can't handle mild sauce. And honestly, I didn't even mind. It was funny, and I figured, hey, someone has to balance out all the spice maniacs. My go-to was always salsa verde. It looked safe, it was green, it tasted fresh, and everyone said it was the mild one. But every time I ate it, my lips would get puffy and tingly. Nothing major, just this little swelling that felt weird but not dangerous. I'd look in the mirror, laugh at my slightly ballooned lip, and think, guess that's just what spicy feels like when you're a wimp. After a while, I even developed a routine. If the puffiness felt worse than usual, I'd take a Benadryl and move on with my day. I didn't think twice about it. It was just part of life for me, like how some people always get the hiccups when they eat too fast. Then came the family barbecue that changed everything. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon. Everyone was in the backyard, music playing, kids running around, and the smell of grilled meat drifting through the air. My mom had made tacos, and of course, a big bowl of her salsa verde was sitting on the table. I grabbed a few tacos, poured on the green stuff like always, and dug in. A few minutes later, that familiar feeling started creeping up again. My lips began to tingle, and I felt the swelling starting. I nudged my sister and laughed. Whoa, this salsa verde has a real kick today. My lips already getting fat. She looked at me, then looked down at the bowl, and started laughing. Like, actually doubled over, can't breathe laughing. Dude, she said between laughs, there's no chili in this. Mom didn't make it spicy at all. It's just tomatillo, onion, and lime juice. Everyone at the table stopped eating. All eyes turned to me. My mom's eyes went wide, and she leaned forward. Mijo, she said, that's not spice. You're allergic. You've been having a reaction this whole time and just calling it spicy? And that's when it hit me. For 29 years, I wasn't a weakling with spice. I was just slowly poisoning myself with something in that salsa. My brain started replaying every moment I'd brushed it off. Every family dinner. Every time I'd casually popped a Benadryl like it was no big deal. It was all starting to make sense. Everyone was half laughing, half concerned. My dad was trying not to chuckle, but clearly found it hilarious that I had mistaken an allergic reaction for a mild burn. My mom looked horrified. My siblings were crying from laughter. Meanwhile, I was sitting there realizing I'd been walking a fine line between haha funny and potentially dangerous for nearly 3 decades. To give you an idea, I'd had these spicy moments since I was a kid. Whenever we'd eat at family events, I'd get those same symptoms. Tingling lips, slightly puffy face, sometimes even a little itch in my throat, but it always went away after a while. So I just thought it was part of the experience. No one ever questioned it because, well, I had a reputation for being the one who couldn't handle heat. I remember saying, "Wait, you mean this isn't from the spice?" And my sister just shook her head, still giggling. "No, dude, this salsa is mild enough for toddlers." That was the moment I felt both incredibly dumb and weirdly relieved. Dumb because I'd basically been self-diagnosing myself wrong my whole life. Relieved because maybe, just maybe, I wasn't actually a wimp. Later that day, my mom told me to book a doctor's appointment immediately. So I did. My doctor looked at me with that kind of concerned amusement you only get from professionals who've heard something truly ridiculous. When I explained how I'd been taking Benadryl every time I ate salsa verde, he just stared at me for a moment before saying, "You're lucky you didn't have a severe reaction. You might have gone into anaphylaxis." That word hit me hard. I realized that all those years I'd been sitting there sweating and laughing it off, I could have actually been in danger. It was both terrifying and absurd. Now I'm waiting for allergy testing to figure out exactly what ingredient's been trying to take me out. My money's on tomatillo, but honestly, it could be anything. In the meantime, my family has not let me live it down. Every single meal now comes with a round of jokes. If we're eating tacos, someone inevitably says, "Better keep an EpiPen handy." Or, "Don't worry, no salsa verde tonight. We don't want you puffing up." I laugh along because, honestly, it is kind of funny. But underneath the jokes, there's this little spark of realization that I've been misunderstanding my own body for most of my life. I wasn't weak with spice, I was just allergic. And all those years of taking Benadryl just in case might have actually been keeping me safe without me realizing it. Looking back, it's wild to think how something so small could have had serious consequences. Now I read every ingredient label twice, and when someone says a food isn't spicy, I don't take their word for it. I test it carefully. And yeah, my family still jokes about it at every meal. But at least now, the family lightweight has a pretty solid excuse. That story wraps up here. That kind of mix-up is both hilarious and terrifying. It's crazy how someone can go years assuming something about themselves that turns out completely wrong. The funniest part is how his family went from teasing him to realizing he might have been in danger the whole time. It shows how sometimes even the smallest things, like a sauce, can surprise everyone. This next story is about a neighbor who kept blocking someone's driveway until they decided to give him a small taste of his own medicine. So for about 3 months straight, this thing had been driving me absolutely up the wall. My neighbor has this giant truck, like one of those oversized ones that barely fits in a normal parking spot, and he keeps parking it just far enough over the edge of my driveway that it technically doesn't block me in. But it makes leaving my house an annoying little obstacle course every single morning. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself it wasn't worth starting some big neighborhood feud over parking, but after the 10th time of doing this weird, tight, multi-point turn just to get out of my own driveway, I started to lose patience. Every morning felt like some kind of test of my spatial awareness skills, and it just wasn't funny anymore. So one day, I decided to talk to him. I figured maybe he didn't realize what he was doing. I caught him outside, and I was polite about it. I said something like, "Hey man, your truck's hanging a little over my driveway. Could you just pull it up a bit next time?" He smiled, said, "Oh my bad." And I thought, cool, problem solved. Except it wasn't. The very next morning, his truck was right back in the exact same spot, like he had measured it to be just barely legal. I sighed, squeezed my car out again, and went about my day. Another week or so later, I caught him outside again. This time, I figured I'd be more direct. I told him, "Hey, you're still parking over the line. It's really making it hard for me to get out." And this time, instead of apologizing, he just shrugged and said, "There's still enough room though," before walking right back into his house. That was the moment I realized he didn't care. At all. He wasn't clueless. He was just being lazy, or maybe a little smug. Either way, I knew then that being polite wasn't going to fix it. So I decided to handle things a little differently. Last Tuesday, I saw him out front doing some yard work. He was trimming his hedges, music playing from a speaker, and his truck was, as usual, parked just enough over the edge of my driveway to make my morning annoying. Only this time, I didn't have to leave for a few hours. So I thought, alright, let's see how you like a small inconvenience. I parked my car directly behind his truck, out in the street. To be clear, I wasn't blocking his driveway or breaking any laws. It was totally legal. But because of the way he'd parked, my car made it so he'd have to perform the same kind of ridiculous back and forth turn to get out. Basically, I was giving him a taste of his own daily routine. Then I went inside, made myself a coffee, and waited. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there he was, looking annoyed. His eyebrows were raised, and he said, "Hey, can you move your car? I can't get my truck out." I kept my expression calm, maybe even a little friendly, and said, there's still enough room. You just gotta do a few extra turns to get out." For a second, he just stood there. You could see the realization wash over his face, like it finally clicked what I was doing. He didn't say anything. He just gave this look, half irritated, half embarrassed, and walked away. I went back to my coffee, trying not to laugh too hard because the look on his face was priceless. That moment of quiet victory felt amazing. It wasn't petty revenge in a destructive way. It was just a mirror. I showed him what it felt like, and apparently that was all it took. The next day, I noticed something different. His truck was parked fully in front of his own house, well away from my driveway. I didn't have to wiggle or twist my car around to get out. It was just normal again. At first, I thought it might have been a coincidence. Maybe he just happened to park differently that day. But no. Days went by, and he kept his distance. It's been weeks now, and he hasn't parked anywhere near my driveway since. And I have to admit, every morning when I back out easily, I can't help but smile a little. Sometimes people don't realize how frustrating they're being until they feel it themselves. I didn't need to yell or cause a scene. I just had to give him a small, harmless reminder that other people exist too. Looking back on it, it's kind of funny how simple the solution ended up being. I didn't have to fight or argue or escalate things. Just a calm little dose of perspective served with a smile. And ever since then, the neighborhood's been a lot more peaceful. Well, at least my driveway has. That's where the story ends. It's funny how such a small move can shift the whole situation. That neighbor probably didn't realize how inconsiderate he was being until the tables turned. Sometimes, all it takes is a calm, clever response to make a point without starting a fight. It's the kind of quiet win that leaves everyone thinking twice next time they try something similar. This next story is about someone who decided to give a group of teenage bullies a taste of their own medicine online. I'll start by saying, yeah, I know this one sounds bad, but before you judge, just hear me out. My family adopted 2 boys a few years back. When they came to us, one was 10 and the other was 15. They'd spent about 7 years in the system before that, and both of them had been through some really rough stuff. Over time, I got really close to them, especially the younger one. I'll call him M. He's a kind kid, funny, and honestly, he's been through enough that all I ever wanted was for him to have a peaceful life. But after a while, he started opening up to me about something that made my blood boil. There was this group of teens, around 13 to 16 years old, who were bullying him and his friends nonstop. These weren't your average mean kids. These guys were straight up cruel. They picked on smaller kids, stole their money, and even tried to start fights just for fun. They'd say awful, racist stuff and make fun of M for being adopted. The worst part? They'd already been in the local paper a couple years before because they beat up a 10-year-old so badly, he had to go to the hospital. And one of them, this one kid who thought he was some kind of gang leader, had even pulled a knife on another child. They were the kind of kids that made everyone's life harder. Every time M told me another story, I got angrier. But what could I really do? I was 10 years older than them, and there was no winning move. Talking to them would just make things worse, and talking to their parents was pointless. They clearly didn't care, and obviously I couldn't exactly go beat up a bunch of minors. Then one day, M told me about this new trend they were doing online. I'm not from an English-speaking country, but let's call it cutting. Basically, they'd take someone's picture, write cruel comments all over it, and post it on TikTok for everyone to see. It was supposed to be humiliating, a way to cut someone's reputation. These bullies were doing that to kids at their school, and they thought it was hilarious. That's when I decided to come up with a plan. I made a fake Instagram account. Nothing suspicious, just a generic-looking profile that could easily blend in. Then I started following all the bullies. I went through their photos, took screenshots, and started editing them. I didn't go overboard or do anything dangerous, but I made them look ridiculous. For example, the one who always carried a knife around and thought he was so tough, I edited makeup onto his face and gave him a bright pink lipstick. Then I added a few snarky captions, nothing illegal or hateful, just enough to sting their egos, and posted them. Within an hour, one of the posts had over 3,000 views. The comments came flooding in, people laughing and clowning on them. Some of the bullies tried to act tough in the comments, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. I didn't post anymore right away. I just waited. About 2 weeks later, M came to me all excited and said, "You won't believe what's happening." He showed me a few posts from that same trend, the cutting thing. But this time, the bullies were the ones getting roasted. Apparently, those edits I made had spread like wildfire. People started making fun of them nonstop. Even better, a rumor had started about the one I'd edited makeup onto. Now people were joking that he secretly liked dressing up in women's clothes. That wasn't actually what I meant when I made the edit, but knowing how cruel those kids were and how much they loved humiliating others, I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. I made sure M would never be connected to any of it. There were so many kids those bullies had messed with over the years that there was no way anyone could trace it back to him. And for once, he actually got to go to school without being tormented every single day. Do I feel bad about it? Maybe. I mean, I know what I did wasn't exactly mature or noble, but after watching those kids get away with everything for years, it felt satisfying to finally see them face consequences, even if it was in the digital world. Sometimes I wonder if that makes me a bad person. Maybe it does. But when I think about the bruises, the tears, and the fear they caused, it's hard to feel guilty about giving them a taste of their own medicine. It's not something I'd ever brag about in real life, and it's definitely not something I'd recommend doing. But for a little while, it gave M some peace, and for that, I don't regret it. That story wraps up here. It's insane how much power people forget the internet has, both for good and bad. In this case, it's like karma just used a Wi-Fi connection. You can tell the storyteller wasn't trying to be a hero, just someone tired of watching unfair things keep happening. It's messy, but there's something strangely satisfying about seeing the bullies finally lose their grip for once. This next story is about someone who finally had enough of their dad's constant annoying habits and decided to give him a taste of his own medicine one early morning. For a while after college, I lived with my parents. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it definitely wasn't great either. The biggest reason was my dad. He's not a bad guy in the traditional sense. He's just the kind of unbearable that wears you down slowly, like water torture. Little things, constantly, for years. He had this habit of waking up at dawn and unloading the dishwasher like it was a marching band performance. Pots clanging, plates rattling, silverware clinking so loudly it might as well have been amplified. Everyone in the house would wake up to that sound whether they wanted to or not. Then there was the morning coffee routine. If you were making coffee, he'd corner you, literally get up in your space, and ask, "Why are you in a bad mood?" You could be standing there, half asleep, not having said a word yet, and he'd start analyzing your supposed attitude. And hygiene? Let's just say that was another nightmare. He never washed his hands after using the bathroom, ever. Then he'd go and touch everything. The fridge handle, the remote, sometimes even my laptop. It was disgusting. Cooking was another battleground. If I tried to make food, he'd hover over me like some kind of backseat chef. He'd suggest better ways to season things, steal ingredients right off the counter, or even twist the temperature knobs while I was cooking because he knew better. One time I was frying something in oil, and he turned the heat up behind my back. The pot started bubbling over, and I nearly had a grease fire. I tried to get him to move out of the way, and he just stood there lecturing me on how I should be more careful. To top it all off, every morning, since I was a kid, he'd blast the most graphic NPR news reports through the house. Stuff about bombings, disasters, all narrated in vivid detail before 7 a.m. It used to wake me up crying when I was little. As I got older, it just turned into another reminder that peace and quiet didn't exist in that house. So, one morning at around 5 a.m., I woke up to the sound of him unloading the dishwasher again. Something in me just snapped. I lay there for a minute, staring at the ceiling, and thought, alright, if this is how he wants to play it, fine. Today, I'm matching his energy. I heard the coffee grinder start up. That was my cue. I flung off the blankets, got out of bed, and walked straight into the kitchen. He was there in his corner, making coffee, totally unaware. I walked right up to him, close enough that it was awkward, and said, Why are you in a bad mood? He blinked, confused. What? I'm not in a bad mood. I gave him the same skeptical look he always gave me. No. I can tell you're in a bad mood. What's up, dude? He shifted uncomfortably, clearly thrown off, and mumbled something about just making coffee. I stayed right there, keeping the same weird smile he always had when he did it to me. By the time his coffee was done, he looked unsettled and tense, but I wasn't done. Oh no, that was just the warm-up. Later that morning, I waited until he was in the living room cleaning out the cat's litter box. I walked in, cleaned it right next to him, and then, without washing my hands, picked up his stuff, his phone, his napkin, the TV remote. He looked horrified and snapped, "What are you doing?" I just shrugged. "What? I thought we didn't wash our hands in this house. Why are you upset?" Then I sat down, pulled up a podcast, and played a murder show on full volume. Something gruesome and detailed about a woman who'd been attacked with a piano wire. I watched him wince as the narrator described everything. He wasn't a fan. When he finally retreated to the kitchen to make lunch, I followed. The second I heard him chopping vegetables, I walked in and snatched half a tomato he'd just sliced, popped it in my mouth, and said nothing. He gave me a look, but didn't say anything. Then, when he turned on the stove, I waited until his back was turned and switched it off. He turned it back on, clearly annoyed, and I said, "Actually, steak cooks better on a cold pan. You should turn it off." I mirrored the same condescending tone he always used. He stared at me, bewildered, like I'd lost my mind. By the time he finally sat down to eat his now overcooked lunch, he broke. The man started crying. Legit tears. And here's the thing. I'd never seen him cry before. Not since our family dog died when I was a kid. It completely stopped me in my tracks. I sat down and told him, "I'm just doing the same things you always do. Maybe if you're crying by noon, you'll understand what it's been like living with you." He didn't say anything, just looked at me, quiet for once. Later that day, I called a therapist and booked myself an appointment. Not for him, for me. Because even though revenge had felt satisfying in the moment, I realized I didn't want to turn into him. Matching his behavior worked, but it also showed me how exhausting it was to live like that all the time. Still, I don't regret it. That day, he got a mirror held up to his face for the first time. He saw exactly how his little habits, those constant jabs and interruptions, had piled up into something unbearable. It wasn't any one thing that drove me crazy. It was years of being talked over, touched without consent, and treated like I didn't know anything. When he finally realized how awful it felt, I think something clicked for him. He didn't suddenly change overnight, but after that, mornings got quieter. The dishwasher waited until after sunrise, and for the first time in years, I woke up to silence instead of chaos. Looking back, it wasn't about revenge. It was about finally standing up and saying, "Enough." That's where the story ends. Small constant annoyances can wear someone down more than one big argument ever could. That dad clearly didn't realize how his behavior added up until it was reflected right back at him. The way the storyteller matched his energy was kind of brilliant. Not cruel, just perfectly balanced. Sometimes that's the only way people learn. This next story is about a grandmother who turned the tables on the post office after they tried to make her pay twice for her Christmas orders. This one goes back nearly 50 years, and it's one of my favorite stories my mom used to tell me about my grandmother. To set the scene, this was back in the days when shopping catalogs were basically the internet. My grandmother did all her Christmas shopping through the Sears catalog. It was a big deal. She'd grab a cup of coffee, flip through those pages filled with toys, clothes, and gadgets, and carefully pick out something for everyone in the family. She always ordered early, usually before Thanksgiving, just to make sure everything arrived in time for Christmas. Back then, you could order things through a system called COD, cash or check on delivery. Basically, you'd place your order, they'd ship it out, and when the mail carrier brought your package, you'd hand them the payment right at the door. Simple enough. Except for this one year, things didn't go so smoothly. Thanksgiving rolled around, and none of her packages had shown up. Not one. Normally, she'd have a mountain of boxes stacked up by then, ready to wrap. So she called Sears to ask what was going on. They got back to her the next day and told her all of her orders had shipped out within a week of her placing them. That meant the issue wasn't on their end. They suggested she check with the post office, so she marched down to the local post office. And keep in mind, this was a small town. Everyone knew everyone. She spoke directly to the postmaster and explained that her packages hadn't arrived. The postmaster listened, nodded, and handed her a form. Then, in the most bureaucratic tone possible, he said, "Our policy is we have 30 days to deliver the packages. If the packages don't arrive after 30 days, notify us in writing. Once we receive your written notification, we'll start looking for them. If we don't find them within another 30 days, we'll issue payment to Sears for the lost packages. You can then reorder replacements." My grandmother stared at him for a moment and said, "So, you're telling me that even if I do everything by the book, none of my Christmas gifts will arrive before Christmas?" The postmaster just shrugged and said, "That's the policy." Now, my grandmother was one of the sweetest, kindest women you could ever meet. But she was also sharp, the kind of person who never raised her voice, but always had a plan. So she smiled politely, thanked him for his time, and went home. That night, she sat down with her catalog again and decided she wasn't going to let the post office ruin Christmas. She reordered everything. Same gifts for everyone, but slightly different versions. Maybe a different color sweater or a different toy model, just in case the original orders somehow showed up later. Her thinking was if the first set eventually arrived, she'd just save them for next year. Sure enough, within 2 weeks, the new set of packages arrived. The mail carrier knocked on her door, handed her the boxes, and she wrote out a check for the full cot amount. She even gave the guy a smile and wished him happy holidays. Then, about a week later, there was another knock at her door. It was the same mail carrier, but this time he looked nervous. He told her that the post office had a record showing she'd paid them by check, but they couldn't find the check anywhere. He asked if she could please write them a new one. Now, a lot of people would have panicked or gotten defensive. Not my grandmother. She kept calm and said, "I'll go down to the post office and talk to the postmaster about it." So she went back down there, walked right up to the same man who'd given her that 30-day lecture a few weeks before, and asked what was going on. He told her, "We seem to have lost your check, ma'am, so we'll need you to write us another one." She nodded slowly, like she was thinking it over, then said in the most polite tone possible, "Well, you have a record that I paid you, correct?" He said yes. She smiled and replied, "All right then. My policy is that you have 30 days to find the check. If after 30 days you still can't find it, please notify me in writing. Upon receipt of your written notification, I'll have 30 days to issue you a new check." The postmaster didn't know what to say. She'd just used his exact wording, his own official policy, right back at him. And guess what? The check was never found, never cashed, and Sears showed her account as fully paid. My mom always said that story summed her up perfectly. She wasn't loud, she didn't argue, and she didn't need to make a scene. She just used logic, patience, and a little humor to make her point. And it always worked. To everyone else, she was just this kind, soft-spoken grandmother. But if you ever try to take advantage of her or feed her corporate nonsense, she'd quietly outsmart you every single time. That story wraps up here. There's something really satisfying about calm, clever revenge, especially when it's done with total politeness. She didn't yell, she didn't get petty. She just played by their rules and let them trip over their own system. It's kind of the perfect move. Honestly, I think that's the dream. To reach that level of unbothered confidence where you can dismantle someone's nonsense with a smile. This next story is about a family who took a stubborn driver to court after she refused to admit fault for wrecking their beat-up old car, and somehow ended up walking away with a huge payout. This all happened quite a few years back, so the memory's a little hazy in spots, but it's one of those stories that stuck with me because of how perfectly it played out. The year was 2006. My big sister had just started driving on her own, and my parents did what most parents did back then. They got her the cheapest, most basic car they could find. It wasn't pretty, but it got the job done. The car was an old mid-80s gold Geo Metro, the kind of car that looked like it had already lived 3 separate lives. Rusty, dented, and dinged on nearly every panel. It was practically held together by willpower and duct tape. And I mean that literally, because one of the side mirrors was actually taped on. Despite all that, it was hers, and she loved it. It ran fine, didn't cost much to fill, and gave her the independence she'd been craving. One afternoon, she was heading to the local Pizza Hut to pick up her paycheck. It was that time of day when the sun's just starting to dip low in the sky. Golden light everywhere, but blinding if you're facing the wrong direction. She was driving carefully through the parking lot, and the sunlight was hitting her windshield just right. making it tough to see clearly. Because of that, she was actually going slower than usual. As she turned into the lot, someone in a big, black suburban-type vehicle started backing out of a parking space. Fast. Before my sister even had time to hit the horn, the Suburban slammed right into the front driver's side of her little Geo. The impact was hard enough to completely total the car. Luckily, my sister wasn't hurt, but the Metro was done for. Both parties had insurance, and the police came out to take a report. Everything seemed straightforward. My parents figured it was just an unfortunate accident, one that would be sorted out once insurance got involved. They even started looking around for another cheap car to replace the Metro. But then, a few weeks later, they got a letter from the Suburban driver's insurance company. And that's when things took a turn. The letter said that the Suburban driver was claiming my sister was at fault. According to her, my sister had been speeding through the parking lot and had hit her vehicle, not the other way around. My parents were shocked. They grilled my sister about what happened, and she swore up and down that she wasn't speeding. She explained that she'd actually been driving slower than usual because the sun was making visibility so bad. So, my parents decided to dig into the police report to see what it said. That's when they found a key detail that changed everything. The sheriff's deputy who wrote the report had noted that the duct-taped mirror, the one barely hanging on, had fallen straight down when the impact happened. That meant my sister hadn't been moving fast at all. In fact, she'd either been almost completely stopped or just rolling slowly when the Suburban backed into her. My parents' insurance company sent a letter back to the other driver's insurer saying my sister was not at fault and that they wouldn't be covering any damages to the Suburban. They even offered to settle for a small amount, the $350 they had paid for the Geo Metro in the first place, but the woman who hit my sister refused. She was adamant that she wasn't at fault and told my parents if they wanted any money, they'd have to take her to small claims court. So my parents did exactly that. They filed the paperwork and prepared for court, but first they had to get an estimate on what it would cost to repair the car. They took the poor little Geo to an auto body shop, and even the mechanic looked at it like it had seen better centuries. Parts for something that old were impossible to find, so they had to calculate what it would cost to repair and refit the panels, replace the door, the front tire, and fix the suspension that got mangled in the crash. When the estimate came back, it was over $4,000. Before the court date, they even offered to settle in mediation one last time. They told the woman she could just pay them the original $350. No hard feelings, no court needed. But she refused again. She was still completely convinced she wasn't at fault. That was a mistake. When the court date came around, the judge went through all the details. The police report, the photos, the mechanic's statement, and the testimony. The key piece that sealed it was that fallen mirror. It proved my sister couldn't have been speeding, because if she had been moving even moderately fast, that duct tape mirror would have flown off sideways or been ripped away entirely, not fallen straight down. The judge ruled in my parents' favor and awarded them the full amount, around $4,000. So in the end, my parents made $3,650 profit off a car that had originally cost them $350. The woman who caused all the trouble walked away with a massive bill and a bruised ego. And as for the old Geo Metro, it might have gone out in a blaze of rust and glory, but it ended up being the best financial decision my parents ever made. To this day, we still joke about it. Take us to court? Okay, that line's kind of become a family classic. That's the end of this story. That's one of those moments where stubbornness really backfires. It's wild how the woman could have just paid the tiny amount and walked away, but her own pride made her lose big. The best part is how calm the family stayed through all of it and still came out ahead. Sometimes patience and paperwork do more damage than anger ever could. This next story is about two students who met at college orientation and shared a quiet, meaningful moment when one of them had a panic attack in a crowded dining hall. When I first arrived at my college orientation, I didn't know what to expect. The whole day was kind of a blur of new faces, name tags, and awkward small talk. They put us into small groups to help us get to know each other, and that's where I met this girl. Let's call her M. She had this really warm, calm energy. The kind of person who makes you feel comfortable right away. We ended up talking a lot that morning, joking around, comparing dorm assignments, and laughing about how lost we both were on campus. Everything was going great until lunchtime. We walked into the dining hall together, and that's when things shifted. The place was packed, hundreds of people talking all at once, trays clattering, the echo of footsteps bouncing off the walls. It was loud, chaotic, and kind of overwhelming even for me. I turned to ask Em what she wanted to eat, but when I looked at her, she wasn't moving. She was standing completely still, her breathing quick and shallow. Her eyes were wide, like she wasn't really seeing anything around her. I recognized it instantly. She was starting to panic. I deal with anxiety myself, and I know exactly how that kind of moment feels. Like everything is closing in and you can't quite get your breath no matter how hard you try. It's scary, and it can happen out of nowhere. So, without thinking too much, I stepped closer to her and spoke softly. "Hey Em," I said. "If you want to grab my hand, I can take you somewhere quiet." She nodded almost immediately. Her hand found mine, and I could feel how tense she was, her fingers cold and trembling a little. I gently led her out of the dining hall and into the open air outside. The difference was instant. The noise faded, the air felt cooler, and it was like the whole world had suddenly gone from loud chaos to soft silence. We sat down on a bench nearby. I kept my voice calm and easy, just trying to make conversation about simple things to give her mind something to focus on. I told her about how confusing the campus map was, how I'd already gotten lost twice that morning, and she gave this small, shaky laugh that told me she was starting to come back down. After a few minutes, she started apologizing. Over and over, she kept saying she was sorry for needing to leave, sorry for ruining lunch, sorry for making a scene. I stopped her gently and said, "You didn't do anything wrong. It's okay. I get it. I've been there too." I told her that I also deal with anxiety, that sometimes things just hit harder than you expect, and that when it happens to me, hand-holding helps me stay grounded. I said it because I knew how isolating it can feel when you're panicking and everyone else seems fine. When she heard that, her shoulders loosened a bit. She nodded and said it helped to know she wasn't the only one who went through this kind of thing. Then, after a little pause, she asked quietly, "Is it okay if I keep holding your hand for a bit? It helps." I smiled and told her, "Of course." We sat there for a while longer, not talking much, just sitting together. Every now and then, she'd take a deep breath and let it out slower than before. Little by little, her color came back, and the tension in her face faded. Eventually, she looked more like herself again, calmer, steady, and ready to go back inside. I told her to stay put while I went back in to grab us some food. When I came out, she gave me this grateful smile, the kind that says thank you without needing words. We ate outside together, just talking about light stuff, classes, dorms, random things we liked. Looking back, it probably seemed like such a small moment to anyone watching from the outside. Two students sitting on a bench, sharing lunch. But to me, and I think to her too, it meant something real. There's something about connecting with someone who understands your kind of struggle. Someone who doesn't need you to explain why you're anxious, who just gets it. That quiet understanding is rare. After that day, Em and I stayed in touch. We'd run into each other around campus, sometimes grab coffee, sometimes just wave and smile in passing. But every time we talked, there was this easy familiarity between us. It wasn't about what happened that day anymore. It was just a natural friendship built on kindness and empathy. Sometimes I think about that orientation day and how easily things could have gone differently. If I hadn't recognized what was happening, or if she hadn't trusted me enough to take my hand, she might have had to face that panic alone in a sea of strangers. But instead, it turned into this quiet, grounding moment. Two people helping each other feel a little more okay in a crowded world. It reminded me that the simplest gestures can mean the most. A calm voice, a hand to hold, a few words of reassurance. You don't have to fix someone's pain to help them. Sometimes you just have to be there. And that's what that moment was. Just being there. Even now, years later, we still talk from time to time. Every once in a while, we'll mention that day and laugh about how chaotic that dining hall was. But deep down, I think we both know that it was one of those rare times when a simple act of kindness changed the whole tone of the day. Maybe even more than that. That story wraps up here. There's something really gentle about this one. It's such a small human moment that ended up meaning a lot. It shows how even something as simple as holding someone's hand can shift everything for them. The way both of them understood each other made it feel calm and genuine, like two people just quietly having each other's backs. This next story is about a guy who tried to do the right thing by returning a lost purse, but ended up being publicly insulted and humiliated in front of everyone at a club. I was on leave from deployment, finally back home after being away for more than a year. That kind of time changes you, and all I wanted was a simple night out, just to relax, catch up with friends, and feel normal again. So I went out with a few buddies and my cousins to a club. Nothing crazy, just drinks, laughter, and trying to shake off the weight of everything that had been sitting on my shoulders for months. The place was packed, loud music, flashing lights, people pressed shoulder to shoulder. You could barely hear yourself think. After a while, we found a spot near the bar to hang out. I remember scanning the crowd, feeling that weird mix of excitement and disconnection you get when you've been away from normal life too long. That's when I noticed something sitting next to us, a purse. It wasn't just any purse either. It was one of those designer Louis Vuitton bags, hand-painted with a sunflower design on the side. Definitely unique. I looked around and spotted a girl, maybe mid-20s, who I was pretty sure it belonged to. She had that same sunflower design on a charm hanging from her wrist earlier. She looked a little drunk, laughing with her friends, swaying slightly with the music. I figured she must have dropped it without realizing. So I picked it up and walked toward her. I wasn't thinking about anything other than returning it. As I got closer, I said, "Hey, excuse me," and held out the purse. But before I could even explain, she turned to me, looked me dead in the face, and said, "Oh," loudly, like I was something gross that had crawled up to her out of nowhere. Her friends all started laughing. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I just froze for a second, standing there with this purse in my hand, realizing she thought I was trying to hit on her or something. My face burned. My stomach dropped. It felt like every eye in the place was on me. Without even thinking, I dropped the purse right there on the floor and said, "Forget it." My anger spiked for a second, and I muttered, "You know what? Forget you," before turning around and walking back to my group. I know I shouldn't have said it, but in that moment, it just came out. When I got back, my cousin, she's 30 and kind of like my big sister, saw my face and knew something was wrong. She asked what happened, and I told her. I tried to brush it off like it was no big deal, but the truth is, it stung. I've always struggled with self-esteem. I'm not the tallest guy, 5'7", and even though I work out and stay in shape, it's something that's stuck with me since I was a kid. Hearing someone dismiss me like that, especially when I was literally trying to help, just brought all of it flooding back. My cousin didn't take it lightly. She got up, walked straight over to that group of girls, and called them out in front of everyone. She wasn't rude or loud, just firm. She told them that I was returning a lost purse, and that mocking someone for doing a kind thing says more about them than it does about me. Then she handed one of them my Instagram handle and said if that girl wanted to apologize, she knew where to find me. I didn't even know she did that until later. At that point, I just wanted to leave. My friends and cousins could tell I wasn't having fun anymore, so we all headed to another spot. Somewhere quieter, somewhere I could breathe again. The rest of the night was kind of a blur. We joked around, tried to salvage the evening, and by the time I went to bed, I had mostly pushed the whole thing out of my mind. But a few days later, while scrolling through my messages, I noticed a DM request on Instagram. It was from someone I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I realized it was one of the girls from that night, the one who had laughed when her friend said, "Ew." She said she wanted to apologize on her friend's behalf. Apparently, the girl who insulted me felt bad after realizing what actually happened, but didn't have the nerve to message me herself. I didn't really know how to feel about that. Part of me appreciated the gesture, but another part of me still felt hurt, not even angry, just tired. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just trying to return something valuable to someone who dropped it, and somehow that turned into a moment that made me feel small again. Looking back, I know dropping the purse on the floor wasn't the best move. And yeah, I probably shouldn't have said what I said. But I also think people forget that embarrassment can make you react in ways you normally wouldn't. That split second when you're laughed at in public, it feels like your whole body goes into defense mode. If I could redo it, I would have just set the purse on the table near her and walked away. No words, no reaction, just silence. But in that moment, it didn't feel possible. That night reminded me that kindness isn't always recognized right away. Sometimes people see what they expect to see, not what's actually happening. She expected some random guy trying to hit on her. I expected a simple thank you. We both misread the situation, but her words stuck a lot longer than she probably realizes. At least my cousin stood up for me. That meant more than anything. She didn't let it slide, and I know she was just trying to show me that what happened wasn't okay, that I didn't deserve to be treated like that. In the end, I guess it's one of those stories that sticks with you. You learn a little about people, a little about yourself, and a lot about how quick moments can leave lasting marks. That's where the story ends. It's wild how fast people can jump to conclusions, especially in a crowded place like that. One word can change the whole tone of a moment. The fact that he was trying to do something kind makes the reaction sting even more. But his cousin standing up for him, that's the kind of loyalty that really hits deep. This next story is about a fast food worker who finally figured out the perfect way to handle a customer complaining about prices by saying absolutely nothing useful at all. I've been working in food service for a while now, about 4 years. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that customers will complain about prices like I personally make the menu myself. It's like they think I'm back there printing out price tags and adjusting inflation on my lunch break. Anyway, this one shift wasn't any different from the usual. I was working the drive-thru, doing my best to stay polite and upbeat even though it had been a long day. A woman came through, placed her order, and it was a pretty normal one. A few items, nothing out of the ordinary. I finished confirming it all and said my standard line. Perfect. Your total will be $19.73 at the window. She pulled up, and I opened the window with a smile like I always do. Hey there, your total's $19.73. She blinked, frowned, and said, $19.73? Really? Now, I've heard that exact tone 100 times. It's that mix of disbelief and attitude that lets you know you're about to have one of those conversations. So, I did what we're trained to do. I double-checked the order. I read every item back to her one by one, just to make sure nothing was added by mistake. Everything matched perfectly. Then I said again, "Yep, that's correct. $19.73. That's when she hit me with, $19 is ridiculous for what I ordered, don't you think? And right there, my brain just short-circuited. I've had so many customers complain about prices over the years, and every single time, it ends the same way. I've tried everything. Well, I don't make the prices. Yeah, things are going up everywhere. I totally get it, but unfortunately, that's the cost. Every response just leads to another round of complaints or eye rolls. No matter what I say, they walk away mad, like I personally overcharged them out of spite. So, in that moment, I decided to try something new. Silence. I looked her right in the eyes, calm as could be, and said, "Okay." That was it, just, okay. The look on her face was priceless. She paused like she was waiting for me to keep talking, but I didn't. I just stood there, still holding the card reader, smiling politely. Eventually, she sighed, handed me her card, and I ran it. Transaction complete. I handed her the receipt, thanked her, and closed the window to get her order ready. She didn't say another word, not a single complaint after that, just sat there waiting quietly for her food like nothing had happened. And I have to admit, it was kind of satisfying. Usually when people complain, I feel this pressure to respond the right way, to stay professional, to smooth things over. But this time, just saying okay, and letting it sit there felt like taking back a little bit of peace. She wasn't looking for an answer. She just wanted to vent, so I let her. After she drove off, I stood there thinking about how weirdly effective that had been. No argument, no attitude, no escalation. Just quiet acceptance of something I couldn't change anyway. Over the years in service, I've realized customers sometimes treat employees like emotional punching bags. They get upset about the total, the weight, the lack of extra sauce packets, things that have nothing to do with us, and they need someone to aim it at. And I get it, life's stressful. But man, when you're on the other side of that window all day, it starts to wear you down. That's why lately I've stopped trying to fix people's moods. I can't change the price. I can't rewrite the menu. All I can do is take their order, hand over their food, and wish them a good day. If they're mad about it, that's not really on me. So now, whenever someone gives me that same look and says, "Wow, that's expensive," I just think back to that moment. Because sometimes the best answer isn't a clever comeback or a polite apology. Sometimes the best answer really is just a calm, Okay, and let me tell you, it's weirdly freeing. That's the end of this story. It's kind of amazing how silence can throw people off more than any explanation ever could. Most customers expect some kind of debate or excuse, not a chill. Okay, it's such a simple move, but it shows how staying calm usually ends things faster. That worker basically mastered the art of peaceful defiance without saying much at all. This next story is about a guy whose coworker became completely obsessed with getting his homemade hot sauce recipe, to the point where it almost cost him his job. So my husband makes this hot sauce. It's his own recipe, something he's perfected over the years. Every time he brings it to a barbecue, people go crazy for it. It's spicy, tangy, and somehow perfectly balanced. The kind of sauce that makes everyone stop mid-bite and ask, "What is this?" He's protective of it though, because the last time he shared the recipe, someone tried to claim it as their own. It didn't go well, and ever since then, he's kept it a secret. Over the summer, we went to a barbecue at his boss's house, one of those big, relaxed company get-togethers where everyone brings something. My husband brought his usual spread: chicken wings, tenders, and steak tips, all coated in that famous hot sauce. As always, his food disappeared fast. You could hear people around the yard talking about how good it was, and one guy in particular seemed especially impressed, a newer coworker named Cameron. It was Cameron's first time trying the sauce, and you could tell it blew him away. He went up for seconds, then thirds, then started asking questions. "Where'd you buy this sauce?" And, "Is this a special brand?" My husband laughed and told him, "No, it's my own recipe." Cameron's eyes lit up like he'd just struck gold. He said, "No way. You made this? Can I get the recipe?" My husband just smiled and told him he doesn't share it. It wasn't rude, just firm. Cameron laughed it off, but there was this look in his eye like he wasn't going to let it go that easily. The following Monday, they ended up working together on a job site. My husband's an electrician, and Cameron happened to be assigned to the same project. And right away, Cameron started asking again, "So, what's in that hot sauce? Come on, man, just tell me the ingredients. I won't share it with anyone." At first, my husband brushed it off with a polite, "Sorry, man, it's a family thing." But Cameron just wouldn't stop. Every day that week, he brought it up. During lunch, on breaks, even while they were working. He'd joke about it, saying stuff like, "If you're not going to share it, at least make me a bottle." Or, "You could sell this, man, but I'll take the friend discount." By the end of the week, my husband was beyond annoyed. Luckily, we had a vacation coming up, so he figured some time away would cool things off. We went on our trip, had a great time, and honestly forgot all about Cameron and his obsession with hot sauce. But when we got back, it started right up again. The very first day my husband stopped by the company headquarters, guess who was there waiting? Cameron. And the first thing out of his mouth was, "Hey man, did you think about that recipe?" My husband couldn't believe it. He just sighed and said, "Cameron, drop it. I'm not sharing it. It's my personal recipe." Apparently that wasn't clear enough, because Cameron took it as some kind of challenge. Over the next couple of weeks, he kept finding ways to bring it up again, asking coworkers if they knew what was in it, trying to get people to talk to my husband for him, even asking around about whether anyone had the radio frequency for my husband's truck radio so he could call him while on different job sites. It got bad enough that word reached the boss. My husband's boss ended up pulling him aside one day and saying, "Hey, if Cameron gives you trouble again, let me know. And if anyone asks for your radio frequency, tell them no." He even told the rest of the team not to share it with Cameron under any circumstances. Eventually, Cameron got called into the office and given an official warning for harassment. My husband thought that would finally be the end of it. But nope. A few days later, Cameron tried again. This time, he said something wild. He told my husband, completely straight-faced, "I'm entitled to that recipe. You brought it to a company event, which makes it fair game." My husband just stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. He was. Cameron actually believed he had a right to it because it was introduced in a professional setting. My husband told him to stop talking to him altogether and walked away. That confrontation earned Cameron a second official warning. His boss made it crystal clear. One more incident and he was done. Apparently, Cameron's been sulking around the shop since then, avoiding my husband but still making passive comments to other employees about how selfish he is for not sharing. The whole situation is ridiculous, honestly. My husband just wanted to make good food for people to enjoy. Instead, he ended up with a coworker who's so obsessed with getting his hot sauce recipe that he's practically sabotaged his own career. And here's the best part. My husband's boss has even started jokingly saying, "Man, whatever's in that sauce, keep it under lock and key." Everyone at work's kind of turned it into a running joke now, except for Cameron, who still looks annoyed every time he hears it. The entire thing started as a harmless compliment, but it turned into one of the strangest, pettiest workplace dramas I've ever heard of. At this point, it's safe to say Cameron might never live it down. That story wraps up here. Something as simple as a hot sauce recipe turned into a full-on workplace issue is pretty crazy. Some people just can't handle hearing no. What's funny is how Cameron's obsession basically ended up isolating him instead of getting him what he wanted. It's a good reminder that not everything has to be shared. Some things are better left as a mystery. This next story is about a mom who got into an argument with another parent after a simple carpool favor turned into a power struggle over who was responsible for someone else's kid. So my daughter had a school project to work on with her friend. They decided to meet at the library after school, and since my son lives at home rent-free, part of our agreement is that he helps out by driving his younger sister places when needed. So that day, he dropped her off. Easy. A little while later, the friend's mom texted me. She said she had something come up and asked if I could bring her daughter home after the library. I didn't see an issue with that, so I replied that I'd take care of it. I figured since my son was the one who dropped them off, he could also pick them up. It made the most sense, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for him to do that kind of thing. When my daughter texted to say they were done, I told my son to head out and get them. Everything seemed fine, until my phone started ringing. It was the friend's mom. She sounded upset and asked where I was, saying her daughter just called to say I wasn't at the library. I told her that I'd sent my son to pick them up instead. He's 19, has his license, and has been driving his sister around for years. That's when the tone of the conversation changed. The mom said she didn't want her daughter getting into a car with a strange guy. I said, okay, but that's how my daughter is getting home. She wasn't having it. She asked me to drive to the library myself and pick the girls up, saying she wasn't comfortable with my son being the one to drive. Now I tried to be polite, but she was clearly trying to tell me how to handle a favor she'd asked for. I told her my son was already at the library, and we only have one car available at that moment. She kept insisting that I have him come back home so I could take the car and go instead. At that point, I'd had enough. I said, listen, I don't want to sound rude, but that's not happening. I'm not responsible for your child. You are. You asked me for a favor, and you don't get to make demands on top of that. My daughter is riding home with her brother. Your daughter can go with them or wait for you. Either option is fine by me. It was direct, sure, but I wasn't going to rearrange my entire evening because she suddenly didn't like the setup after I'd already done what she asked. She was furious. She ended up leaving her appointment early and driving to the library to get her daughter herself. Later that night, my daughter came home angry. She said I embarrassed her and that I was alienating her friend. Even my son told me that maybe I was being a little out of pocket, even though he agreed the other mom was being over the top. I get it. Maybe it sounded harsh, but I really felt like I was being reasonable. I did what was asked, and I wasn't about to be bossed around after doing someone else a favor. The part that really gets me is that the other mom could have just said from the beginning that she wasn't comfortable with anyone else driving her kid. If she'd said that up front, I would have told her she'd have to make other arrangements. No problem. But instead, she waited until after my son was already at the library to suddenly decide she didn't trust him, even though she's met him before at school events and barbecues. It just felt like a no-win situation. If I gave in and went to pick them up myself, I'd be reinforcing her behavior, teaching her that she could dictate how I handle things, even when she's the one asking for help. But if I stood my ground, which I did, I'd come off as cold or rude. It was one of those moments where no matter what I said, I was going to be the bad guy. My son ended up just coming home after realizing the other mom was on her way, and my daughter was quiet the rest of the night. I could tell she was embarrassed, but I also felt like it was a small lesson in boundaries, both for her and for me. I don't think the other mom meant harm, but her reaction was out of proportion. If she didn't trust anyone else to drive her daughter, that's her choice. But it's also her responsibility to figure out how to handle that without assuming everyone else will rearrange their plans to accommodate her. And honestly, the way she said she didn't want her daughter in the car with a strange guy, felt kind of insulting. My son isn't some random person, he's family. He's driven his sister and her friends dozens of times before. If she had taken 2 seconds to ask or clarify, I could have explained that. Instead, it turned into a weird confrontation that could have been avoided completely. At the end of the day, I didn't feel like I did anything wrong by setting that boundary. Maybe I could have said it in a softer way, but sometimes people only take you seriously when you're firm. That's the end of this story. This one's tricky because both parents kind of had valid points. The other mom had a right to decide who her kid rides with, but springing it last minute made things way harder than it needed to be. Still, the storyteller wasn't wrong for drawing a line. When someone asks for a favor, it's not fair to start adding new rules after the fact. It's one of those messy parenting moments where boundaries and egos clash at the same time. This next story is about a hotel worker dealing with an angry guest who demanded special treatment after forgetting his handicap placard and expected staff to somehow fix it for him. So today at work, this guy walks up to the front desk and tells me he forgot to bring his handicap placard. He left it at home. Then he looks at me and goes, "So, what can you do for me?" I paused for a second because, honestly, I wasn't sure what he expected me to say. It's not like I have a drawer full of handicap placards sitting behind the counter. So, I kept it polite and professional. I told him it would be best not to park in the handicap spots if he didn't have his placard with him. I explained that the police drive through our parking lot a few times a day and at night, and they're pretty quick to hand out tickets. I tried to help by offering a simple solution. I said, "Your best option would be to find a spot that's close to the hotel entrance. That way you won't risk getting a ticket." Then I apologized for the inconvenience and figured that would be the end of it. But of course, it wasn't. He just stared at me, didn't say a word, and then walked off toward the elevators. I thought, okay, maybe he just needed to cool off. 10 minutes later, he comes back down. And this time, he's mad. Like, full-on demanding to speak to a manager mad. He stands there at the front desk and says, "Get your manager out here right now." I explained, as calmly as I could, that I was the only front desk worker on duty that day. It was Saturday, and on Saturdays, we don't have any managers in the building. I offered to give him my manager's email address if he wanted to leave a complaint or get in touch later, but that just made him angrier. He said, "That's unacceptable. I need a phone number." I told him, "Sir, she doesn't have a work phone number, and even if she did, she wouldn't be answering today since it's the weekend. And that's not just me trying to get rid of him. I know from experience she doesn't answer outside of her weekday hours." At this point, he starts getting louder, saying how unhelpful I'm being, and how ridiculous it is that a hotel doesn't have someone to fix this kind of situation. I wanted to ask him what exactly he thought I could do. Make him a new placard out of cardboard? Write him a note saying, "This guest promises he's handicapped"? Instead, I stayed calm and tried to keep it professional. I told him that, unfortunately, there's nothing I can legally do about it. Parking enforcement is handled by the city, not the hotel, and we can't override those laws just because someone forgot their placard. Still, he wasn't satisfied. He kept saying, "You need to make an exception." I reminded him that we have signs all over the parking lot saying, "Park at your own risk." We are not responsible for tickets or damage. Those signs are there for a reason. Eventually, he stormed off again, mumbling under his breath about terrible service. And I just stood there behind the counter, trying not to roll my eyes. I even double-checked online afterward, just to be sure I hadn't missed something. Maybe there was a way to print a temporary handicap placard or something, but no, my state doesn't offer that service at all. So really, what did he expect me to do? I've worked enough weekends to know that people sometimes assume the front desk has unlimited power. Like, we can rewrite parking laws, control the weather, or materialize a manager out of thin air. But at the end of the day, all I can do is give reasonable advice and keep things professional. When he didn't come back again, I figured he probably either parked far away or risked it anyway. I just hope he doesn't end up with a ticket. Not because I care that much about him after how rude he was, but because I know the complaint email would land on my desk Monday morning if he does. So yeah, that was my Saturday. No manager, no magic solution, and one very upset guest who thought the world should bend because he forgot something at home. That's where this story ends. There's something about working in customer service that really shows how differently people think about responsibility. Some folks just expect others to clean up their own mistakes. It's wild how often people assume staff can fix anything, even when it's completely out of their control. The storyteller handled it better than most would have, especially on a weekend shift with no backup. That kind of patience deserves a medal. This next story is about a worker who met an elderly woman in need and decided to show kindness in a moment that would stay with them forever. I had just clocked in for my shift yesterday when something happened that's going to stick with me for a long time. It started like any ordinary day, the usual hum of conversation, the sound of the door chime, and the smell of coffee brewing nearby. Then a sweet elderly lady came in. She must have been in her 80s. She was shaking badly and moving slowly with the help of a cane. You could tell every step took effort, and just seeing her like that tugged at my heart. I went over to her right away and asked if she needed help with anything. She gave me this tired but warm smile and said, "Do you mind filling up my cup with ice, dear?" Of course I said yes. It was such a small thing, but the way she asked, so polite, so hesitant, made me want to do more for her already. While I was filling her cup, she kept chatting with me. She apologized for bothering me, which honestly broke my heart a little. Then she explained that a new medication was making her shaky and affecting her balance. I told her not to apologize, that I was there to help. She smiled again, but then her voice softened. She said, "Dear, I hate to be a bother again, but do you have anything old or expired I can get for a discount? I don't have much money." The moment she said that, something inside me just sank. It hit me how much she was probably struggling, and how she still tried to ask so politely, like she didn't want to inconvenience anyone. I knew right then she needed more help than she was willing to ask for. So I told her, "Ma'am, whatever you need today, I'll pay for it. Doesn't matter what it costs." She blinked at me like she didn't believe what she just heard. Then she said quietly, "Are you sure? You don't have to." I told her I was sure. I asked if she'd like a drink or maybe something to eat. She nodded slowly, and her voice shook a little as she said, "Can I get a coffee and maybe a cheeseburger, if that's not too much for you?" I smiled and said, "Of course." So I bought her a Starbucks coffee and a cheeseburger. Nothing fancy, but it felt like the right thing to do. When I handed the food to her, she started crying. Actual tears. She reached out and hugged me, holding on like she didn't want to let go, and she kept saying thank you over and over again. I hugged her back and told her she was going to get through this, that it was going to be okay. Then I walked her to her car, making sure she was steady the whole way. Before she got in, she told me she was going through her second round of cancer treatments. She'd spent nearly everything she had left on chemo and doctor visits. She said what I did was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in a long time. Before she drove away, she smiled at me and said, "Sweetie, you made this day amazing. Thank you. I'll keep you in my prayers tonight." I waved as she pulled away, but as soon as I got back inside, I went straight to the back room and cried. Not because of the praise, not because I felt proud, but because of her, because of what she's going through, and how something so small, like a coffee and a meal, could mean that much to her. I'm not sharing this for recognition or praise. I just can't stop thinking about it. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own problems that we forget how much a simple act of kindness can mean to someone else. You really never know what a person is going through. For her, it was a meal and a kind word. But for me, it was a reminder that a little compassion can change someone's entire day, maybe even their whole outlook. That moment reminded me that kindness doesn't have to be big or loud to be powerful. Sometimes it's just one person caring enough to say, "I got you," when someone else really needs to hear it. That's where the story ends. There's something really moving about how small gestures can hit that deeply. It's crazy how just a cup of coffee and a few kind words can make someone feel seen again. That story kind of reminds you that people carry quiet battles every day, and most of the time, you'd never even know it. It's the kind of moment that sticks with you, even long after it's over. This next story is about a dorm front desk worker who had finally had enough of a student's lazy and entitled behavior and decided to return the favor with a little well-placed petty revenge. I've had plenty of weird interactions at my campus job, but this one still cracks me up every time I think about it. So I work part-time as a front desk proctor at one of the dorms at Northeastern University in Boston. It's a pretty simple gig. I sit behind a desk, check people's student IDs, and let residents or their guests in and out of the building. It's not hard work, just a lot of sitting, scanning cards, and staying alert. To give you a picture of the setup, there's this long desk in the middle of the lobby. The entrance door is on my left, the exit door is on my right, and the ID card reader is right beside me on the right side of the desk. Normally, residents just walk straight up to the front of the desk, hand me their card, I scan it, and they go on their way. It takes maybe 30 seconds tops. Simple, smooth, no problems. Except there's always that one person. This one girl, I'll call her Miss Convenient, decided she was above the normal process. Instead of walking to the front of the desk like every other human being, she started standing way off to the left side near the entrance door. Basically, she'd position herself so that I'd have to spin my chair completely around, take her card, turn back the other way to scan it, then turn around again just to hand it back. It's a ridiculous dance for something that's supposed to take seconds. At first, I brushed it off. I figured maybe she was in a rush or didn't know the system, but then she started doing it every single time, like clockwork, and she'd do it with this look on her face like it was my job to adjust to her convenience. I remember sitting there thinking, this can't be real, but whatever, I had stuff to do, and it wasn't worth making a scene over. Then one evening, she came in again. This time, she had a friend with her. I could tell right away she was in full look-at-me mode. She was talking with this exaggerated accent, one that definitely wasn't hers, trying to sound all fancy and impressive. Meanwhile, she strolls right past the front of the desk like always, plants herself on my left side again, and just waits there holding out her card like I'm supposed to rotate my whole body around for her convenience. Her friend, bless her, looked totally lost. She stood at the front of the desk like a normal person, and after a few seconds, she quietly asked, are we allowed to stand here? And Miss Convenient, without missing a beat, goes, yeah, it's more convenient for me to stand here. Her tone was pure attitude. That was the moment I snapped. Not in an angry way, but in that calm, calculated way where you decide, okay, I'm done playing nice. I took both of their cards and scanned them like usual. But instead of turning around to hand them back to her, I leaned to my right and placed both cards on the far end of the desk, the complete opposite side from where she was standing. I didn't throw them or anything dramatic. I just made it obvious that if she wanted them back, she'd have to walk all the way around to get them. Then I looked up, met her eyes, and gave her the most neutral, deadpan expression I could manage. No smile, no irritation, just silence. And then I casually turned back to my laptop like nothing happened. Her friend hesitated, then awkwardly walked around the desk to grab both cards while Miss Convenient just stood there, completely thrown off. You could almost see the gears turning in her head as she realized she'd just been out-pettied. She didn't say a word, just kind of blinked, adjusted her bag, and followed her friend inside. And from that day forward, guess what? She started walking up to the front of the desk like everyone else. That tiny moment of inconvenience was all it took for her to get a reality check. Sometimes you don't need to say a word or make a scene. You just have to mirror someone's energy and let them figure out why it suddenly doesn't feel so great on the other side. That's the end of this story. That girl probably thought she was untouchable until someone gave her a taste of her own attitude. It's not about being mean, just setting the balance straight. Sometimes quiet pettiness says what words don't need to. This next story is about a man who planned the perfect vacation for his wife, only for one small mistake to ruin the entire trip before it even began. My wife has always dreamed of visiting Jeju Island in South Korea. It's been one of those things she's mentioned for years. A trip she'd always wanted to take, but that somehow kept getting postponed because of my work schedule. Every time we thought we could make it happen, something came up. But finally, after years of putting it off, we decided this was the moment. We were going to make it happen. 5 full days in Jeju, just the two of us. We planned everything down to the last detail. The flights were booked, the hotel reservations were confirmed, and the itinerary was set. We had even picked out the restaurants we wanted to try and the sites we didn't want to miss. The timing lined up perfectly. I finally had a break from work, and we were both so ready for a change of scenery. Now, just for context, my wife and I hold different passports. For me, visiting South Korea is visa-free for up to 90 days. For her, though, it usually requires a pile of paperwork and an actual visa. But there's a special exception. If she visits only Jeju Island, she doesn't need one. That was part of why this plan works so well. Before the trip, she mentioned that she needed to fill out an online arrival card 3 days before flying, and then she'd be set. I remember checking my own requirements too. I knew my country didn't require a visa, so I did a quick Google search, skimmed the official consulate website, and confirmed I was good to go. Visa-free entry, easy. I figured I just needed to fill out the same online form she did, and we'd be fine. Fast forward to the big day. We arrived at the airport at around 3 in the morning, tired but excited. Our flight was set to leave in 2.5 hours, so we felt good about the timing. We went straight to the check-in counter, waited about 20 minutes in line, and when it was finally our turn, everything seemed fine at first. The airline agent checked my wife's documents and quickly handed her the boarding pass. But when it came to mine, things stalled. The agent frowned, typed something into the computer, and then called over another staff member. That person checked something, then another came over. 3 people huddled around a screen, whispering and pointing. Finally, one of them looked up at me and asked, "Sir, do you have your KETA?" I blinked. My what? Apparently, even though my country has visa-free entry to South Korea, I still needed to complete something called a KETA, a Korean Electronic Travel Authorization, before I could board the flight. It's basically like an e-visa application that's required for all travelers from visa-free countries. I was completely thrown off. I thought visa-free meant you could just show up with your passport and go through. My wife, on the other hand, technically needed a visa but was exempt because of the Jeju rule. Meanwhile, I could go anywhere in Korea except Jeju, unless I had this one little form filled out. The irony wasn't lost on me. So there we were, sitting on the floor of the airport at 3:30 in the morning, me frantically opening my laptop to fill out the KETA application. It only took about 10 minutes to complete, and I paid the $10 fee right there online. I hit submit, got the confirmation screen, and waited. And then I saw the dreaded words, "Your application status is under assessment." I showed the airline staff the page, hoping they'd let me through, but the woman just shook her head and said, "It usually takes about a day to process. You might get it by tomorrow." That was it. The trip we'd been planning for months, gone. I told my wife she should just go without me, that I'd join her the next day once the application was approved, but she refused. She said we'd plan to do this together, and if I couldn't go, she wouldn't either. That made me feel even worse. By the time we got back home, it was 5 in the morning. We were both exhausted and disappointed. She went straight to bed without saying much, and I sat down at my laptop just to check the application again, and that's when I saw it. Approved. It had been processed and approved while we were on our way home. I just stared at the screen in disbelief. If we had waited another hour at the airport, or if the system had been just a little faster, we could have made that flight. Instead, the entire trip was canceled. That mistake ended up costing us about $1,000, not to mention the tension that followed. My wife tried to be understanding, but I could tell she was disappointed. And honestly, I couldn't even be mad at her for that. It was completely my fault. Looking back, I still can't believe I didn't double-check the entry rules properly. I was so focused on her visa situation that I didn't think twice about mine. And in the end, the irony of it all is that the person who didn't need a visa was the one who couldn't get in. That's one travel lesson I'll never forget. That's where this story finishes. This one shows how one small detail can flip an entire trip upside down. You can plan every meal, every hotel, every photo spot, but one overlooked form can still ruin it all. That must have been such a gut punch after all that excitement. It's a reminder that sometimes even the simplest things deserve a second look. This next story is about a developer who got one of the strangest tech support requests ever when a coworker's dad decided to fix her laptop charger in the worst possible way. So, a few years back, I was working as a product lead and full-stack developer at a nonprofit organization based in the UK. To give you a bit of context, the IT department was small, just 15 of us managing systems for more than 300 employees across different countries. Because of that, people often came directly to me for help, even if their problem wasn't technically my responsibility. I didn't really mind most of the time, especially when I had a few minutes to spare. But every now and then, I'd get a request that made me question what planet some people live on. One sunny afternoon, during my lunch break, a colleague of mine, let's call her Jane, walked up to my desk looking stressed. She had just gotten back from a trip to France and started off by saying, "Hi Anno, do you have a spare power cable for my laptop? I desperately need one right now." Now, that's not an unusual request. People lose chargers all the time. So I just asked, Did you lose your power cable? She shook her head and said, well, no. That caught my attention. I asked what happened, thinking maybe it broke or got left behind at the hotel. She explained that while she was in France visiting her father, she realized her UK laptop charger didn't fit the European plug sockets. That's a pretty common issue. Most travelers just grab a cheap travel adapter and call it a day. But that's not what Jane did. She said, I asked my dad for help and he sorted it out. At first I thought she meant he lent her an adapter or maybe helped her find a shop that sold one. But then she followed it up with something that made me completely stop what I was doing. She said, very casually, my father loves tinkering with electrical stuff, so he cut off the end of the cable and replaced it with a European plug. I remember just staring at her for a few seconds, trying to process that. She had literally let her dad take a company-issued laptop charger, cut the power cord in half, and rewire it with a different plug head. When I finally spoke, I said, wait, you actually had him cut the cable? She nodded like it was totally normal and added, yeah, but now that I'm back in the UK, it doesn't fit the sockets here. I don't know how to change it back. I honestly didn't even know how to respond. I just said, one moment please, and quickly went to find one of the guys from our IT support team. I told him, you need to come hear this. You won't believe it unless you hear it yourself. So he came over and I asked Jane to repeat the story. She did, word for word, completely unaware of how insane it sounded. When she finished, my colleague just blinked a few times before saying, yeah, that's destruction of company property. That power cable is now considered damaged and unusable. He explained that she'd need to file an official IT support ticket so we could order a replacement from our supplier. He also added, as politely as possible, that maybe next time she should just buy a travel adapter instead of cutting up office equipment. Jane looked genuinely confused and said, I don't understand what the big deal is. My dad's good with electrical stuff. I had to hold back a laugh at that point. I could tell she really believed it wasn't a problem, like we were just being dramatic for no reason. She eventually agreed to submit the ticket, but made it clear she thought we were overreacting. I remember her walking away, shaking her head, muttering something about how IT people make things so difficult. The thing is, it wasn't just about the charger being broken. Company equipment is legally considered property, and modifying it like that voids any warranty or insurance coverage. If she'd shorted a circuit or caused a fire, it could have been a serious issue. But nope. To this day, she still thinks we were the problem. Sometimes when I see her around the office, she still gives me this look, like she's mildly annoyed that I made her file that ticket years ago. I guess in her mind, we're the ones who caused the inconvenience, not the fact that her dad turned a laptop charger into a science experiment. It's honestly one of those stories that gets funnier the more I think about it. At the time, it was frustrating, but looking back, it perfectly captures the kind of wild, you can't make this up moments that come with working in IT. That's the end of this story. There's always that one coworker who treats company equipment like it's their personal DIY project. What gets me is how confident she sounded about it, like rewiring a power cord was totally reasonable. It's kind of impressive in its own chaotic way. Still, I feel for the IT folks who deal with this kind of stuff all the time. Some people really do make tech support way more exciting than it needs to be. Anyways, that's all the stories I have for you today, and I hope it was a chill listen. If you had a good time, dropping a like and hitting that subscribe button really helps me out. And as always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.